You're listening to The Switch. I'm your host, Stephanie Shaw. Hey, welcome to The Switch. I'm Stephanie Shaw. I'm a multi-certified holistic nutrition coach who, after finding no success with the 18 doctors and 2 world-renowned healthcare facilities I visited, decided I needed to make a switch and take my health into my own hands. Now I'm obsessed with you getting hormonally balanced and emotionally aligned. This podcast is about education, empowerment, and simple no-cost strategies you can implement right now. I'm so excited to be here with you to talk about all things health, beauty, clean living, and mindset. Ready to take your mind and body to the next level? It's time to make the switch. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Switch. Today I have with me Sunil Godse. After making a series of bad decisions, with one leading to a friend being shot and killed, he spent thousands of hours on research and interviews to stop people from wasting time making bad decisions by sharpening their intuition. I love this topic because I'm always thinking, I think I have a pretty good gut, or intuition. And I know some people that really have great intuition. So thank you for being here. I'm so excited to talk about this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie, for having me on board. Hopefully here to drop some knowledge bombs. And I can assure you that the people listening and those who are watching the snippets will be able to get some great advice today that's going to get them either during our call or right after how to sharpen their intuition.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So let's just jump right in.
You bet.
When I read that I have 14 seconds, well, I know you can immediately make an impression, but 14 seconds for people to trust me. How does that work? What does that look like? And how, as a business owner, does that relate to the revenue that I'll generate?
Absolutely. So when I looked at it, part of it goes back to, all of it goes back to the research I did on intuition, and we'll kind of dive into the story of why I needed to take a deep dive. But when I looked at the science behind what intuition really was, to really kind of get a sense of, okay, we trust it and we ignore it. And we have these memes and we talk about, I trust my gut, I ignore my gut. And it's just sort of out there. It is sort of this intangible sort of woo-woo type of way. And I really needed to tie it down to something, anchor it for myself as an ex-engineer, and to others who are kind of looking, yeah, I kind of get it. But one of the pieces that I looked at was when you're looking at trusting someone, that trust factor is really, when in the research that I looked that had MRI and brain scans, trust hits a part of the brain very closely tied to the amygdala or the limbic system. So this is the fight or flight. This is every single time you make any decision. That's the first part that the neurons hit. That's the first part of the brain gets lit up. And what the research shows is that when they were looking at a relationship, and there were a couple of things there, probably 4 or 5 papers I saw, trust was developed on average between 14 seconds between, and trust is actually initially, it's 14 seconds between trusting and then giving money or having a transaction. So the transaction took 14 seconds. The trust factor means that you have to be able to trust that other party in whatever way. And then that person will either work for you or they will buy from you, what have you. And so you have to be able to look at the intuition of others to say, this is a brand that I trust. What that person is saying in their marketing message resonates with me. And we've all, just go into social media, just go to Facebook, go to Instagram, what have you. How many of us immediately know when we see an ad, immediately, right? And so it doesn't take us 14 seconds.
Yeah.
That's just what the research showed, right? Many of us can go to take a look at, there's something wrong with this picture. There's something wrong with that person. And so when you distrust, and there's different areas of the brain where trust and distrust happen.
Right.
And again, MRIs show this. When you distrust, then you're not engaged. And so when you're not engaged, you're not going to follow that leader. You go from what I call a 3D leadership model, where they actually see you as people, to a 2D leadership model, where you're actually a statistic. And when you're a statistic as a company or somebody that I want to follow or is leading me, now I'm looking for another job because you're no different than the other statistic.
Right.
So myself as an employee, I'll go to where I'm valued, where I'm psychologically safe. And then if you look at the research again, there's this trust report that comes out by Edelman every single year that shows that when an employee is engaged, that they trust you, they are 31% more productive, and that hits the bottom line 37% higher. That's that direct hit to profitability. And look at your turnover costs. And a lot of times we'll look at that. Those are what I call laggard indicators. Those are indicators after the fact. What you need to be fixing is the things that lead to that indicator.
Yeah.
And so when you look at higher turnover costs, when you look at lost productivity, and when you look at customers going elsewhere and taking the money out somewhere else, companies lose up to $1 billion a year. And that's just what's tracked.
Right.
It's probably 10 times more than that. And so trust is a huge factor when it comes to a business.
How does that relate to me as a person?
So trust is really about that intuition, and it's really making sure that you care for other people and they trust you. So are you walking the talk? Are you saying one thing and not doing another? Are you treating people like people, right? So as a business owner, that's what you have to be. You have to, what's your purpose? Why are you doing this business? I can feel that. And if you don't believe in what you're doing, or if you're treating me like a statistic, I feel that. When I feel that, that's your intuition saying there's something wrong here. And this person doesn't value me. I'm going to look elsewhere. And that's what they do. They lose interest. And I just went, I had an interview yesterday with David Williams, who he was in Utah, Salt Lake City, and he ran a company called Fishbowl Inventory. He had people based on trust. He would lose 1 in 100 people every couple of years because he has such an engaged following. They had people from Silicon Valley come in and offer people twice as much money and most people in his company said no. Those that left within 6 months came back saying, I want to come back. Even though they were offered double the money, even though they were offered all these perks like foosball tables and all that stuff.
Right.
Trust is something different where you really feel like you want to work. And as a leader, as a business leader, that's the culture that you want to have. When you are running a business on purpose, on intuition, on trust, on empathy, and all these things we do in our lives anyways, we're not being robots. We do this with our friends.
Yeah.
We do this with our colleagues. When we go out, we have a good time and have a coffee or a latte. That's a trusting relationship. And these are the basics of being a human being. Yeah. And so when you take the basics of being a trusted human being in the workplace, people want to work for you. People want to follow you. People want to buy from you. And 99% of businesses are missing it. And that's why the failure rate after 99% of businesses fail by the time they hit year 5. And
I've heard
90% by the year 2. And they're just doing things the old way, and it's not working. And more of the Generation X's and Gen Z's are wanting to work for companies where there is a purpose, where they are valued. And it's not 80-hour weeks, it's 40-hour weeks, but you can put much more productivity in a 40-hour week if you treat people better.
Yeah.
It's very simple. If you want stats, let's look at the stats. So in my generation, average of about 12 years in a job. Gen X's average 3.9 years. Gen Z's average 3.2 years. Where's the trend?
Yeah,
right?
Going down.
It's going down. And you can say, well, they're lazy, they're entitled, as a lot of people are saying. Perhaps there's always a few, even bad people at my generation that'll always make the news. But from my perspective, people want quality. They want to work for people. They want to work for people.
Right.
Not a stat.
Not a stat. Yeah.
Not a bottom line. And that's why 14 seconds is all that it takes.
Let's go back. So I dove right in and we were talking about the trust level. I'll get to intuition and gut and what that really means.
Right.
But let's go back and talk a little bit about you, where you were before. You did mention that you were an engineer, and how did you get here? Why is this so important to you?
Yeah, so the story was, so how I kind of really dove into intuition was really about reflecting on not just my life, but it actually did come from a business perspective. When I wrote my first book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster, the premise of that book was that if you were to read the stories of hurdles and failure from others, then if you're reading that book, you should be able to succeed faster as long as you don't repeat those mistakes that are in the book. And so I interviewed close to 300 people. And the one question I kept getting is, Sunil, give me the one thing that's going to make me successful as an entrepreneur. And I kind of rolled my eyes saying, listen, I didn't come here with a cue card or a PDF sheet. I came here with a 400-page book. And so, and it used to baffle me, like, why do I keep getting this question? Yet when I went back to the audio recordings, 80 to 90% of them were using some form of, I should have trusted my intuition. I should have trusted my gut. I knew what the right decision was. I just didn't track that pattern. I wasn't looking for it. And
Yeah.
I'm going, wow, this in a business context is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I reflected on my life, when I was 5 years old, I remember this is the seed of entrepreneurship, truly at 5. There was these video games that I wanted to buy, and my dad said they were too expensive. And yet I had this voice clearly tell me, and
Right.
I can still see where I was standing, where I'm looking, and when that voice hits, it's just so ingrained in my brain. Um, this voice says, "Go, Sunil, go door to door to raise money." And that is exactly what I did. Went door to door and raised $200. $100
Wow.
went to my dad,
Right.
and the other $100 went to my school because they were doing a charity event.
Mhm.
So that for me really solidified this thing called intuition that I kind of experienced. I never kind of formally knew about that.
Right.
And then as an engineer, an ex-engineer, I drank the East Indian Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
And the societal norms, you're East Indian, you need to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or you're a failure. That's
Yeah.
it. And I became the engineer, hated it. And then when I left it a couple of years later, because my intuition saying, you got to leave, I ended up becoming a part-time investor in a restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
making 5 times more as an engineer. And then my entrepreneurial spirit took off, and I had
Wow.
6 ventures later, $20 million. And they were in different ventures: wholesale clothing, retail clothing, pop-up events, entertainment company. And I loved it, and the seed of all of that was because I had trusted relationships with those people that either worked for me or my
Right.
customers, and they kept coming back for more. So you don't need to necessarily have a large base of customers. It'd be great if you do that, but you can always have a small base and double or triple their purchases. And effectively, you're doing the same thing as a large base with just one person purchase.
I
Um,
like.
yeah, and
Yeah, I
so
like
that's how
that.
pervasive it is.
Yeah, and it seems like you had what they trusted immediately in order for them to start working with you. I like that. So, what
Yeah.
does intuition and or gut really mean, and how do
So
we know if we have it?
yeah, absolutely. And so diving into intuition was really a question mark as to, okay, so why did I trust it sometimes and why did I ignore it sometimes? And
Yeah.
I really need to understand that. And so I struggled with a bit of a definition initially as to, okay, what is this thing called intuition? And I went online, and a lot of people were, basically writing about voices from God and manifestation. And it's okay, but people see that as
Mm-hmm.
intuition. I come from the engineering background. So I kind of
Mm-hmm.
need a blend of sort of art and science part of it, right? So the
Yeah.
art is these, what I call signals. And then there was science that I need to find out that existed. And so when I looked at these signals, and so the science part was really interesting because when I went to talk to an international psychic,
Mm-hmm.
she talked about intuition and signals, and that resonated with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then to balance that, I went to a neurologist and asked him, does the science exist? And he says, absolutely, it does. Intuition exists. And more neuroscience research is coming out that's showing that intuition acts much earlier than we're consciously think about. So I really need to take a dive into this science to figure out,
Right.
okay, where is it? I went to an academic database. I type in the word intuition. I'm expecting like 10 or 12 articles, tens of thousands of articles
Oh
later
wow.
on intuition, and not just in the personal life, but again in business and in entrepreneurship, just all over the place. And so I was really kind of lit up with fire, saying, "Wow, this is great." And so when I looked at the research, part of it, what intuition is, when I talked about the amygdala earlier on,
Mm-hmm.
is that's exactly what the MRI showed, is that when intuition, you're using your intuition, it lights up the limbic system, which is the fight or flight area. So all it
Right.
knows is really kind of think, do, act, trust. And the other thing is that there's no capacity for language. So
Mm,
what happens is we describe intuition our own way.
right.
So for me, it's an art and science. For those who thinks it's voices from God, or it's a manifestation, or it's just a feeling, or it's experience, it's fine. It's not for me to judge that. It's because
Right.
this is yours. And then the other thing is, I thought, okay, if I had it when I'm 5, then perhaps I'm born with it. And
Mm-hmm.
there's this paper that shows that infants as young as 2 months old have been
Wow.
shown to have intuitive capabilities, or this paper says intuitive physics. And so that kind of explains that.
But I'm going to pause you right there.
Yeah.
When I thought about that, I'm thinking that's so true, because if you're ever around an infant, they know if something's scary, or if it's a
Yes.
stranger, or if it's just an environment where they're not comfortable. So we don't look at it, or we may not initially define it as intuition, but that makes perfect sense what you just said.
Yeah, and if you look at the testing, and I have a link to that paper in my blog on the intuitionology.com website, but that's
Mhm.
exactly the experiments that they did. These 2-month-old infants, would you think don't know anything? How did they know how to move certain objects? And some objects were
Yeah,
hidden. They just
yeah,
knew, right? And so that's
yeah.
kind of how they tracked intuition. So really, really fascinating stuff. And then with the part with the neurologist saying that it happens much earlier than we're consciously aware of.
Hmm.
2 papers showed that intuition actually hits us on average 7 to 10 seconds before we actually make a decision or take an action.
Wow.
And they looked at a similar type of study with entrepreneurs. And when entrepreneurs made intuitively led decisions, the intuition hit their brains on average 7 seconds before they actually made that decision.
Mm.
So here's the personal life, here's the business. So intuition does not matter if it's but your personal life or your professional life or a business. It doesn't matter. It's the limbic system. It hits. And so one of the things that I found out was that when we look at these signals, there's
Right.
actually 2 types of signals that we go through. There's positive and negative signals.
Okay.
The positive signals are the ones that tell you the decision that you're making is the right one. And so for me, it's a feeling of flow, and it's also the dots kind of connecting.
Okay.
And so what happens is and so each one, it's very unique. So one of the CEOs I interviewed, he's now run 2 multi-million-dollar organizations, and he's run them by seeing this omen on his right shoulder. There's no
Mm.
color or shape, but when he's doing a business deal or hiring someone, he sees this omen pop up,
Hmm.
and he says yes because that's his positive signal,
Hmm.
and the results speak for themselves. And then the other side is from positive signals are negative intuitive signals. So for me, I get that kind of a bit of a gut feeling.
Hmm.
Or another one is when something's negative, what happens is for some reason my eyebrows cross and I lose my peripheral vision, and
Oh,
I
wow.
get hyper focused. And so that is a negative signal that something is my intuition is telling me to pay attention to either the person, the situation, or whatever is happening. I need to pay attention because there's something bad about to happen. And there's I interviewed another entrepreneur.
Hmm.
And so he says, Sunil, like nobody's ever asked me that question. What are my signals? I mean, so it's, hey, Stephanie, let's go for a latte. What are your intuitive signals?
Yeah.
Right? You say like,
No,
there's something
right?
wrong with this
What?
guy,
I
right?
know,
He
right?
didn't ask about the weather or anything. He just goes right into like intuitive signals. There's something wrong with that Sunil guy. But so he was saying, listen, I don't know what they are, but why don't we keep talking?
Hmm.
And so as he's talking about the businesses, the ventures he got into for the wrong reasons, such as money, fame, or ego, his left earlobe kept pulsating with heat. And so he now realizes, Sunil, oh, I just realized it. Whenever I got into those businesses, my left earlobe started getting hot. And I distinctly remember when I talked to my wife about that, he was saying that his left earlobe would get hot. And so that was his unique intuitive signal that was negative.
Right.
And where we have to be careful with negative signals is that they actually start very subtle in nature. So Oprah calls it a whisper.
Mm.
And it starts very subtle in nature. Those are the ones that we typically ignore.
Yeah.
They get louder and louder. And why we have to actually take the time to make sure that we find out what our signals are, especially the negative ones, is so let's say, Stephanie, you and I do an exercise and we actually try and figure out what our signals are. And let's say we get this gut feeling that's negative,
Hmm.
and you've properly identified that as signal number one. So let's say I haven't done my homework and have not spent the time and say, yeah, I get that gut feeling too. Maybe that's my first negative signal.
Right.
For me, if I make the mistake of thinking that that's my first negative signal, but it's actually number three, when that gut signal comes up for me, if it's signal number three, that means I've missed signal number one and signal number two because they were too subtle and I didn't do my homework in identifying it. If I've missed those 2 signals, that means I've made 2 bad decisions.
Mm.
And if I made 2 bad decisions, it could be just me stubbing my toe, or I could be headed towards bankruptcy. I don't know.
So is that part of the work you do with clients to help them figure out what, because immediately I thought, oh, if I'm making a bad business decision, I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, like between 2 and 2:30. I just wake up and I'm like, "Ooh, this just doesn't feel right." And I kind of knew it, but now talking with you, I'm like, "Oh, that must be my negative signal to know that something's just not right."
Absolutely. And that's the
Yeah,
pattern that I help people look at. So what is
yeah.
the pattern of your positive signals? What is the pattern of your negative signals? And when do they come up? And
Mm,
what signals are associated with what type of decision? So it could be a business versus a personal decision. It could be
mhm.
an HR versus a sales decision. It could be a marketing versus whatever it is. There's usually a pattern to these signals, and you have to spend a lot of time looking back at those decisions that you made and what are the pattern of the signals that you had at that time,
Yeah.
and really picking up on that pattern. So that's what I help people work with. So either informally, one-on-one, and we'll get into sort of the reasons why we ignore intuition as well, coming up as well, because
Yeah.
there's some deeper work that needs to be done with those. But those are the characteristics of the signals that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And the other thing I found out, which is really important, was that there's actually four types of intuition. And so to be good at intuition, you actually all need to do, it's just like driving a car. For
Uh-huh.
example, you press the button, or you turn the keys, and you hear the engine work and you drive. You don't necessarily need to pop open the hood and figure out what's underneath. But
Right.
I'm such a nerd that way. That's maybe my engineering coming out, that I need to figure out, okay, how does this thing actually work actually?
Right.
And so with these four types of intuition, the best way I can show this to you is from an example, a business case from a non-believer.
Okay.
And so one of the friends that I had was someone who was an investment banker. So if you recall at the time, manifestations from God and voices from God and those kind of things were how intuition was described.
Mm-hmm.
As an investment banker where spreadsheets ruled his world, he just does not believe it. He did not believe in intuition. And he said,
Okay.
Sunil, look, I don't know what we're going to talk about. You come down, I'll give you an hour. The intuition does not exist, but
Right.
we'll talk about it for 5 minutes and let's catch up. I haven't seen you for a while. The rest of the hour. So I'm driving down and I'm thinking, okay, what are we gonna, how are we gonna talk about this, right? And he was clearly one of my first interviewees, and it was a great litmus test for intuitionology. And so I turned the cameras on, and I'm actually telling him about that CEO that sees omens,
Right.
and he goes, Sunil, look, I I would really like to shake that guy's hand, and I'd
Yeah.
like to meet him actually, because let me tell you, when you look at business or anything in life, it's about experience and it's about your learning.
Right.
That's it. And so now we're going to get into the four types of intuition. One of the four types of intuition is called experiential intuition.
Okay.
And so what happens is, as we talked about earlier, you were born with intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at your brain like almost like an iceberg, the 90% below water is basically like it's your subconscious mind, and the conscious is the 10% above water.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're born, every single day you're going through learning, you're going through experience, both formal and informal, good and bad, yours and others. Every day, 5 to 6,000 per day when you're young, 26 to 35,000 per day when you're older. All of that going put into the subconscious area of the brain. So the time that you get a signal that intuition is telling you that this is a decision you have to make or walk away from, it's already well informed by pulling information from that library that is similar in nature to the decision you're about to make. So if it tells you a positive signal, what your intuition is saying is that somewhere, somehow in your past, you've made that type of decision, or you've had the strength to go through that decision, or you can do it.
Right.
And so you just need to trust your signal, even though you may be fearful of doing it because you're going to a different area or a new area. And of course, the other side is true. If it's a negative signal, then somewhere, somehow in the past, something like this has happened and didn't turn out well. So your intuition is saying, Sunil, come on now. We've been through this somewhere. And because it's got this library information, that's why it's giving you a bad signal that
Mm-hmm.
something's up. And so that's why it's so important to listen to those signals. And so what I was telling John is sometimes the intuition has you go against the data. And he goes, well, Sunil, that's really funny. I have an example for you. And I said, well, perfect. And so John was in the business of putting franchises in,
Okay.
like a McDonald's, Burger King, and things like that. And so whenever they looked at a location, they would use a benchmarking system of a 10. And
Mm-hmm.
so when they looked at traffic patterns and demographics and development coming up in that area,
Right.
if there was a location that looked at was a 9 out of 10, then they'd put a franchise there.
Right.
There's this dilapidated area of Toronto, which was a 5.5 out of 10. His team has said there's absolutely no way we're going to put a location here. And so now what happens is we're getting to the second of the four called situational intuition.
Okay.
So John and his partner just walk to this area of Toronto, and he just looks around, and now he's saying, perhaps it's my intuition, I'm not sure, but something is telling me that we absolutely need to put that location there, even though my team says no. And he goes against his team, goes against the data, and puts the location there. That ended up being the first location for something called the beer market, which was the best, most profitable of all the franchises he had in his portfolio.
Wow.
And and now John's kind of getting it. He's starting to use intuition in his lingo. I can tell his body language is changing. He's being a little bit more positive. And then he's telling me that his purpose changed. He went, instead of being an investment banker, he now actually wanted to run a business. And so now we're going to get into the third of the four called relational intuition. What relational intuition does is that it filters people through to only allow people in the inner circle who trust you. They are there for you in the ups and downs. They're truly there for you to move your life forward. Right. They understand your purpose. They're not just yes people. They're not yes people. These are people that will give you constructive criticism, but they actually care about where you're going. All the people who are concerned about money, fame, ego, high-end restaurants, security, limousines, private jets, all those people told John he was nuts for leaving the investment banking industry. Not one of them asked him why, except his wife. And so his wife asks, John, why do you want to do this? And now John, and I'm quoting John now.
Right.
Honey, this just feels right. There's the intuitive signal.
Yeah.
From a non-believer 45 minutes earlier who said, this does not exist. Not only is he telling me about an intuitive signal, now at this point, he's fully using the word intuition.
Right.
Because the next thing he tells me is about the decision that he made, which is the fourth of the four, called creative intuition. And creative intuition, as I said, helps you make the decision. If you're just making a sandwich or turning left, your creative intuition, it's not very creative, it's pretty low. But if you're making something that's so obtuse in nature, your creative intuition is really high. And so this guy quits. He's making $3 to $4 million a year, and he trusts his creative intuition to make that decision. And he says, sometimes you just have to go against the data. You have to trust your intuition. I'm quoting John now, to make that decision. And so he quits. He walks into that tiny bankrupt little restaurant. That restaurant ended up being Eastside Mario's location number 1. And over the next 20 years, he grew that to over $2 billion in revenues.
Wow.
All because it felt right.
Right.
That's the power of intuition.
And so when you walked into that interview with him, he was like, hey, you got a few minutes, we'll just catch up. And by the end of the interview, he hadn't even realized that throughout his life, all his decisions were intuitive decisions that he had been making.
And all I'm doing is it's his intuition. He was born with it. It's his subconscious phenomenon. It's his experiences. It's how he defines it. It's how he looked at how the decisions he made, reflecting in the past. And for 1 hour later, he fully understands what intuition is. Yeah. And now he knows how to guide it. And so that's what I help people do. That's exactly what my Intuitionology project is designed to do.
I like that. So tell me some, you have some incredible stories. We talked prior to this recording around people who perhaps didn't follow their intuition. So give me some stories about the impact of ignoring your intuition.
Absolutely. So one of them was actually Nelson Mandela's grandson, Ndaba Mandela. And so when I looked at, and so he believed intuition came from his ancestors. And of course, Nelson Mandela talked a lot about intuition, about trusting his gut. And so what happened with Ndaba is that as a youth, you know, even though he's surrounded by all these huge people coming to he has these presidents and prime ministers and Muhammad Ali and all these people, you know, as a kid just showing up, hey, yeah, let's go have some lunch, you know.
Right.
He ignored his intuition and he got into, some drugs and alcohol and just sort of doing things the wrong way. knowing that he ignored his intuition. But for him, that was a learning lesson, that even though his grandfather was telling him to trust this thing, he needed to experience that, and things didn't go so well for him. Yet when he ended up understanding about trusting intuition, the hard lessons of that, we can take a look at the work that he's doing now. I mean, he's got a nonprofit. He's educating people. He's advising some political leaders, and he's a powerhouse all over the world.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens when you can trust your intuition. And so sometimes we think, even though you're so small, you don't think you can impact a world that way. You can. I mean, and I don't understand why we minimize ourselves sometimes. Right now, he maybe perhaps was blessed with a leg up, but if you look at somebody like Sarah Prout, who came from a 10-year abusive relationship. It's 40 instances of physical abuse. One time that she was arguing with her partner at the time about a movie, and next thing you know, her intuition is saying, now you got to get out now. And so this is someone who left, just walked out the door with $30,000 in debt, about to go on welfare,
Wow.
2 kids to feed, and nowhere to go. She's picking up furniture on the side of the road and actually going into public washrooms to steal their soap, put it together so that her kids can actually have a decent shower. And so that's her, like, walking out with nothing, but trusting that her signal every single day will open up a door of opportunity another day, another hour, another minute, and trusting those signals. And 6.5 years later, not only is she married to the love of her life, but she is now in the manifestation space, and she's built a multi-million-dollar business from just walking that door with minus 30,000 and almost hopeless, to now affecting people all over the world. And before COVID, she was actually booked on stages all over the world. So
I listened to a little bit of her message. So,
and so we when we trust intuition, these signals, they open up these doors of opportunity. And what we have to do, one of the reasons why we don't listen to intuition is we simply don't trust ourselves. So there's either something back, there's trauma, either somebody said something that triggered you, or you've experienced trauma as a kid, as a child, or you're trying to prove something to somebody else, and so what happens is, when you have these things, we get so emotionally stuck in the past. Our values are driven by the values of others, and so what happens is our decisions today are actually based on things that happened in the past. What we actually need to do, and where the real work happens, this is what I do with one-on-one coaching, is that people really need to, I release that through things like hypnotherapy and pattern recognition in the past, to get over those incidents. And when we kind of get emotionally unstuck, now we're actually living in the present moment. And so that's what living in the present moment actually means, is that where you can leave all those anchors behind and then really kind of live today. What is my signal today? And the big thing about that is actually not just living it, but taking action. And this is where manifestation and things, if you believe in that stuff, taking action is really important when it comes to intuition, because there's that fear factor. This is something that's unknown. I'm not sure if I can do it. But remember, when your intuition is giving you a positive signal, it's already telling you, listen, in the past, you've done something so bold before. You can do it. You've done it. So why should you have fear? Why should you give other people the power? Right. And a really good story of this is Vin Jiang. Vin Jiang, he's an international magician. And so now he's talking about communication. 2016, his career was on fire, 100,000 people a year, 80 stages around the world. And he was just, if you looked from him from an external perspective, this guy was on top of the world. The problem was, he wasn't on top of the world internally. He was in a really crap place. And so when I interviewed him, what he essentially did was he went to New Zealand, and he said, I told his wife, I need to fix this. I got to do it. And he isolates himself, and he puts up these values on, okay, what do my friends want? My family, my career, my manager, my fans, what do they all want? Right. And when he looks at all these, he's saying, well, these are all what they want. Like, where am I?
Mm-hmm.
Where's Vin in all this? And it was just cathartic. And so when he was putting up his values, what he wanted from his friends, what he wanted from his career, what he wanted from his manager, and he turned the tables to live life from his perspective. What he was saying is, although he thought it would be cathartic, awakening, happy, he said it was frightening,
Mm.
because for the first time in his life, he was giving himself permission to be him.
Right.
And he did it, and so good. And then he left New Zealand to come back, and he falls back in the same pattern again. High rise in LA, big brands, hanging around all the wrong people. And 6 months later, his parents actually come up from Australia, and it was his mom that pulls him aside and says, and he was saying, there's a saying in Vietnamese
Mm-hmm.
that when you hang around squid, you're going to get some ink on you.
Mm.
And he said, and his mom said that you're hanging around a lot of squid, but this is not my boy. You
Right.
really need to change. And that was like the intuitive moment for him to redo that whole exercise, but to finally live through his values. And so he sold that high-rise apartment, went out to the suburbs, bought a minivan, and he said, if I need to stop being an international magician or communicator, I'm going to do that. If it means, he even got to the level, if it means telling my wife I don't love her anymore, as hard as it may seem, he's being true to himself. Now, obviously,
Mm.
he's still married, but
Yeah.
one thing that I told him, this is where something called opportunity cost comes in the way when you don't listen to your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
I told Vin, it's not just the 6 months that you lost not trusting your intuition. It's also the 6 months that you could have gained
Mm-hmm.
trusting your intuition. So you actually lost a full year of your life.
Yeah.
And if you've lost a full year of your life and you're in the business of helping 100,000 people a year, how many people did you leave behind?
Yeah.
Like,
I
how
like
many
that.
people did you not help?
I
So, right?
Yeah. No, no, I like that. That's big. I while you're talking, I'm going back to where you said it could be based in some type of trauma, and then how the words that you're saying sometimes I don't know exactly how to put it, but sometimes it can be standoffish to people who are Christians or who have a relationship with God. And standoffish may be the wrong word. It may be something that you think, oh, I can't follow my tuition because I need to follow God, or I can't manifest because it has to be what God tells me. What I encourage as a Christian, and I have a wide base of my audience are Christian, as a Christian, I've found that you can't afford not to do it because it's just the way that you phrase it or the way that you think about it. So if you think manifesting or intuition is more woo woo and it's not something for you, take that time and actually pray and ask God what he has for you. And I'm telling you, it's one and the same. I think it's a
Yeah.
connotation versus a
Yeah.
denotation.
There's same thing. It's the same
Same,
thing.
same
Same thing.
exact thing. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I'll be honest. 2 years ago, I would have been like, "Oh, this is so weird," and woo woo. And now I honestly know and recognize that once you deal with the childhood trauma, once you open yourself up to recognizing that your intuition can take you to the next level, that's when things start to move. And I don't see that God seeing that as something as bad or something negative because he gave us that intuition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm a Hindu as well. So
Yeah.
we've got like thousands of gods, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately intuition for me in some sense is listening to the values that in my case the gods that we have are
Mm-hmm.
having us move through life just to be a good human being.
Right.
So that's something I definitely agree with. And if it comes, and some of the people I interview say it's voices from God. So
Mm-hmm.
remember, this is something that you define. If you absolutely think it's voices from, and God, there's only one way God's going to tell you to do is be a great human being.
Mm-hmm.
Trust yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's where the dichotomy happens is if you know that your voices from that God's telling you one thing, and then you've got other people influencing, like it could be a priest or it could be people in the congregation that are steering you away from that true voice that
Mm-hmm.
you hear.
Mm-hmm.
That's where that dichotomy happens. And so people do that for their own selfish reasons,
Mm-hmm.
self-serving reasons, and we don't find that out until later.
Yeah.
And so it has nothing to do with your definition of being Christian or seeing it from being Hindu or what have you. That's exactly what intuition is from your perspective.
Right.
And so you're absolutely in line with everything I'm saying here. And like I said, I mean, there's a spirituality piece that I have that I talk about. But when you look into John Rothschild, who thinks about data and experience, and I talk to him about spirituality, he's going to say, Sunil, there's something wrong with you. But it's not for me to convince him that spirituality is the way. I'm just convincing him this is how he sees intuition.
Right.
So he doesn't tie it with spirituality. He may be a spiritual person, but intuition in his mind is something different than that.
Yeah.
Whereas intuition in my mind is one and the same with God.
Yeah.
And so again, these are definitions that are very individual to you. And there's no right or wrong. It's how you define it. And remember, from a scientific perspective, it hits the amygdala. You define it.
Yeah.
Right. And so we can debate whether it's spiritual or not, but it's not really a debate. We're not talking about the same thing.
Right. Right.
We're just talking about intuition, but it's how we perceive it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. And I just want to get that across, because some people may immediately be like, oh, I can't listen to this, or this is wrong, or so forth. But I just challenge people to think about their definition of it and how it could actually positively impact their lives. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if there's a dichotomy between what God is saying and what they're doing, perhaps they got to look at what are they doing. So why are they going against values? Are they following societal norms? Are they following somebody else's advice that's truly not going through your values? Perhaps that's there, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't want to blame intuition for also taking you down.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that's what happens. In fact, Mark Metry is one that I interviewed. He has the Humans 2.0 podcast series. It's like one of the top 100 on Apple on iTunes. And when I interviewed him, so he had social anxiety when he was in high school, and it almost killed him. And so he started telling me about the fact that he started saying in my podcast that intuition led him down the wrong path, and he started to lie again and again and again in high school. And he got so far away from who he was that he wanted to take his own life because of social anxiety. And I said, okay, listen, Mark, let's back up. If we were to back up the podcast interview, because I was listening very intently, one of the first things that he said after he said intuition takes you down the wrong path, the very next statement he makes is, I knew I shouldn't have lied, but.
That was intuition. Yeah.
Even in our podcast interview, intuition squeezes it in, saying, no, I didn't tell you. He used something called ego, where he needs to follow the herd. His identity is tied to other people he thinks is cool, or they're wearing the right brands, or they happen to be with the right people, or whatever the situation is. That didn't resonate with his values. So again, he moved his values to other people and identified with them so far away from him that ultimately he almost took his own life.
Wow.
And his intuition at the start of that saying, you are worthy of yourself. You don't need to be associated with this group that doesn't resonate with you. Hang around with people that do resonate with you. And if that's just one person out of 10 million, that's just one person out of 10 million. Like in my circle, I have two. I've spoken to over 100,000 people on stages. We've all met tens of thousands of people ourselves. I've got two people in my inner circle that I can trust.
Yes.
And that's all I need.
I love that you just said that. And I don't know if people heard it, but your intuition does not take you down a negative path. Your intuition keeps you out of trouble. It keeps you out of trouble. So I love that. So before we started talking, we were talking about your daughters and what great things they're doing. So tell me a little bit about how they're using their intuition to start their own business, and make sure you tell folks how old they are too, because that's cool.
Absolutely. Cool. So with my oldest daughter, and I'll tell you her age after I finish the story, just to give a bit of surprise factor. So we went to India in December 2018, and so she's been an artist. So for those who are watching the clips, you can see the art behind me. Those are hers, and she's got a website called heartification.com, HEARTification.com, and so you can see her art there. But what she did in December 2018, she was looking at this beautiful art, and she goes, "Wow, these are amazing!" And she found out that these were made by people with no arms.
Oh,
And she
wow.
goes, oh my God, like these people are disabled and they were begging for money and there's we can't survive. And she goes like, we got to do things for people with disabilities and illnesses. Like, why do they have to be treated like that? Like they're just normal people.
Right.
And so she just really got this yearning to do something. And so I said, okay, this has got to come from you. Of course, the intuitionology guy.
Uh-huh.
And of course, I'm not going to say trust your intuition. I mean, it's a little too formal. Of course, now they understand that. But and so 6 months later, we're playing board games, and she
Hmm.
just looks at me and she goes, Dad, I'm ready. And I had no clue what she was talking about. And I said, okay, what are you ready for what? And I said, I remember that time in India. And you go, yeah, uh, I'm ready to put that forward. I said, okay, so what's your idea?
Right.
No joke. This is what she says. I'm going to open up a business. I'm going to paint. I'm going to sell my paint. I'm raise some money, sell my paintings. I'm going to have them come to an event, and I'm going to have all the materials so they can come and express themselves through art for free. And that's what I'm going to do. And I said, okay, are you sure? And she goes, yeah. I said, okay, let's do this. And so the very next day, we opened an actual Canadian nonprofit corporation. It is a
Wow.
registered federal corporation, nonprofit. She had her first fundraiser a couple of months after that.
Hmm.
She targeted $2,500. She raised over 5,000.
Wow.
Her originals were all gone within the first hour of a 3-hour event. We even had someone from Scotland FaceTiming her originals to buy.
Oh, wow.
Um, and a couple of months after that, she had her first pop-up event. She had people from Big Brothers Big Sisters, a couple of people in wheelchairs, someone with Down syndrome that came, and they painted. And what we did was as soon as they finished painting, we took a picture and we put it on a shirt, and we
Oh,
hand delivered
nice.
those shirts to them as a surprise. And this is where, when you're running a business with purpose, this is where
Hmm.
purpose is such a
Mm.
huge part of bringing people towards you.
Yes.
Her name's Avni. Avni's purpose was so clear as to help those with disabilities feel really good, that there was one incident at this pop-up event that really solidified it. And there's this guy named Carl who had cerebral palsy,
Hmm.
Parkinson's disease. And so if you look at those watching, his left arm was shaking violently
Hmm.
at the event. And he goes, Avni, come here. Let me show you what this event is doing for me. As his left arm is shaking, he takes his paintbrush, dips it in paint, and
Hmm.
then he starts to paint, and his left arm stops.
Oh, wow.
And he goes, this is what your event is doing for me.
Wow.
Thank you so much. He hadn't painted in 28 years,
Wow.
and it just opened his mind. And that's the moment of purpose.
Yeah.
And that, to date, she's raised over $30,000 in over a year and a half. She's 14.
That's incredible. I
She's
love
14.
that story. I love that story. I'm talking to adult women and trying to get them clearly to their purpose, and to hear that she had that intuition to she followed her intuition, did what she needed to
Yeah,
do. She's 14. I love
yeah,
that. That is wonderful. I have two more questions for you.
sure.
One, I asked people for a bit of advice that you would give anyone. You're not allowed to say follow your intuition. So, some small piece of advice that someone can implement immediately. And then the second question is, what was your switch? What made you the person that you are today?
Absolutely. So the first piece of advice is uh, really kind of getting down to figuring out how intuition works is really about looking at what happened in the past. So
Mm.
the first thing is to just get a sheet of paper and take a look at the decisions that you made that were the right ones, and how did it feel in the moment. And you need to write these down. If you do not write these down, there's neuroscience research that says that if you write things down, you are 3 times more likely to actually take action on these things.
Mm.
And then you do the same thing for bad decisions, but particularly with the bad decisions, you look at, okay, I made a bad decision, but trace that back to the first feeling that you had, the first intuitive signal, because remember, the subtle ones are the ones that are wrong. So if you, let's say, brought somebody into your life, and that feeling was that gut feeling, was that signal number 1 or was that signal 4? And if it was signal number 4, what you need to do, and you don't know what number it is until you trace back to the very, very first time that you
Right.
got an inkling about that person, saying, oh, something's just telling you something's up. That's the signal you need to get to. So it's
Right.
good to get signals number 1, 2, 3, and 4, because now you know if signal number 2 hits, you've missed signal number 1, and so you can course correct yourself. And you really need to spend time doing that. And I've got a 7-day challenge on my Intuitionology website that does that for you,
And
where
I'll
you
make that
actually,
available to everyone as well.
yeah, absolutely. And it basically takes you through it takes you through a challenge where you pick a problem that you haven't solved before. And that's important, because in the challenge, what you do is, if you haven't solved that problem before, the first thing you do is figure out, okay, what did I do to make sure that had me not solve that problem?
Mm-hmm.
Those are your negative signals,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you tried something and it didn't work, your negative signals would have told you that it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So you do your inventory of negative signals, then you switch to what should work. And so doing your negative signals first is important, because if you try and put in something that should work that shouldn't be there, your negative signal is going to come say, Sunil, come on now. You know that's a process or something you can't do.
Right.
So you need to take it out. And so then you're left with positive signals and negative signals and a plan of action as to what you need to do. Then you have to think about, who do you surround yourself that's going to solve that particular problem. And once again, you don't pick your best friend if that best friend's not going to help you solve your problem, because again, your intuition is going to go, Sunil, just because you're doing a 7-day challenge, you want to talk about it and feels nice and sexy, that person's not going to help you solve the problem.
Yeah.
Then you take that person out until you get someone that is solving that. And it could be a mentor, it could be somebody you don't know, but that person or group is going to help you solve that problem. Then you solve the problem.
Yeah.
And the thing with the 7-day challenge, I've got 2 people that actually I take you through every single task with you. And so one actually sold his house in that 7 days. So he actually had listed his house, and the first day he had this real estate person come in, throw her business card at him and saying, you're only going to get 20,000 under asking. I've been in the business for 20 years. That's all you're going to get. And he used to be scared, saying, oh my God, yeah, you're right. We got to sell this right away. Yeah, I need to. And so he would have signed. But again, at that time, because of he was thinking about his intuition, was saying, so I don't trust this person. 7 days later, he ends up getting a bidding war for his house, and he ended up selling $50,000 over asking price.
Wow.
He made 70 grand in that 7 days. That's 10 grand a day. The other person who goes through this is someone by the name of Ashley Michelle, who was actually a witness to a homicide. Not only was she a witness to a homicide, she actually walked into the apartment after her boyfriend had just murdered their friend in their bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
He closes the door behind her, locks it, puts a knife to her back, and says, I'm already going away for 1 murder. Might as well make it 2. Her intuition calms him down, her down. Everything, all the 4 types are walking. It's walking through her. Relational intuition is making sure that he's okay. Situational intuition is looking for a way out. Experiential intuition is saying, okay, when I need confidence to get out of this, and the creative decision is waiting for that opportunity to actually leave.
Mm-hmm.
And so he assaults her, he chokes her, he asks her to clean up the blood. And then the moment comes where she gets a slight moment that he turns his back and starts walking towards the bathroom. And his intuition says, now. And she bolts. And luckily, obviously, she's alive.
Mm-hmm.
And she used the 7-day challenge to basically minimize the PTSD, depression, and anxiety, not to get rid of it. But in the 7 days, she learned to trust people, start trusting people. She learned that she can go back to the gym and just really kind of feel much better.
Right.
And so for her, that's huge.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So those 2 people can solve, John and Ashley can solve those type of problems. And this is free, by the way. There's no cost. There is absolutely no excuse for you not to go through that and solve any kind of problem. And then you also have a template. I've got a PDF worksheet that you fill out that you can use for any problem. Just start a fresh one.
Yeah.
So you have a template, a tool right now that's free that can help you with every single decision in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll make sure that that's available for everyone. I love that.
Yeah.
Tell us about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And I was just going to talk about the switch.
Yeah.
So the switch for me was how important it was for me to really, really understand what intuition was. Mm-hmm. And you alluded to it in my bio. And if it hadn't happened for this particular incident, that gave me that emotional depth to understand why I ignored it, which was so important, was the whole reason for intuitionology, really. And this was when I was in engineering, and a good friend of mine was being stalked at the time. And so she reached out to me to say, Sunil, I really need some advice. And again, there was a signal saying, Sunil, meet with her that afternoon. I had nothing planned. And I ignored that initial signal to say, let's meet a couple of days later. And the very next day, that same guy was stalking her, walked up to her at a bus shelter and put a bullet through her head. And that was the reason why I really need to understand why I ignored my intuition. And it was already telling me what the right decision was. So what was that thing that was telling me what the right decision was? Because a good friend of mine would be alive today.
Yeah.
And that was the big switch. Apart from not going into the career that was meant for me, which was entrepreneurship, apart from losing my money. Like when I track back to even other times I ignored my intuition, it was telling me I was in a career I didn't like. I lost all my money because of a bad client. And now here I've lost one of my best friends. And so how much time did I waste? How much money did I waste? How much effort did it go down the waste in the waste bin because I didn't trust my intuition? And my whole intuitionology project is about you sharpening your intuition so that you don't waste time making bad decisions.
And I love that. I love that so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate you spending time with us. As I said before, I'll make sure that all of your information is in the show notes. And to everyone else, here's to your health. I am so excited for you because you just finished another episode of The Switch, which means you are the fierce person I already knew you were. If you're ready to join an exclusive group of other fierce high performers like you, a group where you can bounce ideas off one another and ask questions, be sure to join our exclusive Facebook community. You can find the link below.